The fluorescent lights of the prison corridor hummed, casting a sickly green pallor on Rocco Costello's face. His tailored suit was gone, replaced by a cheap orange jumpsuit. 2 guards flanked him, their grips firm on his arms. As they pushed him forward, he saw her, Clara, standing at the end of the hall, just beyond the steel gate, her hands tucked into the pockets of a simple coat. No fear in her eyes. Not anymore. Just a quiet stillness that was more terrifying than any threat. "You!" he rasped, the sound tearing from his throat. He strained against the guards, a caged beast rattling its bars. "The waitress! How did you—" She didn't answer. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips as the gate slammed shut between them, the final, deafening clang of his world coming to an end. 6 months earlier, that world had been his kingdom, and the restaurant, La Scogliera, was its throne room. Rocco Costello didn't walk into a room, he conquered it. The air grew thick, conversations died. He moved with the heavy, deliberate grace of a predator, his 2 hulking shadows, Leo and Frankie, trailing behind him. Clara felt his presence before she saw him, a cold dread that slithered up her spine. She kept her head down, polishing a wine glass until it squeaked in protest. "Evening, Mr. Costello." Maria, the hostess, stammered, her face pale. Rocco ignored her, his dark eyes scanning the dining room like a hawk surveying its territory. They landed on Clara. He changed course, his expensive leather shoes silent on the marble floor. He stopped at her station. "You're new," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." 3 weeks, Clara replied, her voice even, her gaze fixed on the glass in her hand. He watched her for a long moment. He was used to people cowering, fawning, or trying to catch his eye. Her deliberate refusal to look at him was a new kind of challenge, an insult. He slid into the most prominent booth, the one reserved for him. "You'll be serving me tonight." The meal was an exercise in cruelty. He sent back the wine, claiming it was corked. He declared the steak, cooked medium rare as ordered, was tough as shoe leather. He complained that the music was too loud, then too soft. Through it all, Clara remained a portrait of calm professionalism. She replaced the wine without argument. She had the kitchen fire a new steak. She nodded and adjusted the volume. Her composure seemed to inflame his temper further. At the end of the night, long after the last patrons had left, he gestured to the small, chipped jar on the service counter where the staff pooled their tips. "Bring that here." Clara placed the jar on his table. Rocco stared into it, a sneer twisting his lips. With a flick of his thick wrist, he upended it. Coins and crumpled bills scattered across the table and rained down onto the floor, skittering into dusty corners. "A pittance," he grunted, grinding a $5 bill under his heel. Barely enough to feed a dog. He looked at Clara, his eyes glinting with malice. "You want it? Pick it up." Leo and Frankie snickered behind him. The kitchen staff, peering through the service window, froze in horror. This was the real Rocco. Not the charming benefactor whose picture was in the paper, but the gutter snake who enjoyed the taste of other people's humiliation. Clara's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She met his gaze for the first time that night. Her eyes were not filled with the fear or tears he expected. They were cold, grey, and ancient, like stones at the bottom of a frozen lake. Without a word, she knelt, her movements precise and economical, and began to gather the scattered money. She didn't hurry. She didn't flinch. She simply collected what was hers, each coin a small, silent promise of retribution. Rocco watched, a strange feeling coiling in his gut. He had wanted to break her. Instead, he felt as if he had just kicked a hornet's nest. He couldn't see the hornets yet, but he could hear a faint, ominous buzzing in the air. "Get it all," he growled, trying to reclaim his power. She did. Then she stood, placed the money back in the jar, and set it on the table. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Costello?" He stared at her, speechless for a second. Then he threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I like this one," he said to Leo. "She's got spirit. We'll have to break it." Clara turned and walked away, the sound of his laughter following her like a disease. She didn't know it yet, but he had just signed his own death warrant. Back in his office, Rocco's accountant, a perpetually nervous man named Arthur, wrung his hands. "There's a bleed, Mr. Costello. A small one. Pennies. Sometimes $1. Siphoned from a dozen different accounts. It's untraceable. A ghost." Rocco waved a dismissive hand, lighting a cigar. "A ghost? Find the rat and break his fingers. I'm paying you to handle these things, not to tell me bedtime stories." "But sir, the algorithm, it's flawless. It moves like smoke. Whoever this is, they're not just a hacker. They're an artist." "Then find the damn artist and bring me his hands," Rocco snarled, ending the conversation. Miles away, in a cramped apartment that smelled of old books and chamomile tea, the artist was at work. Clara sat before a triple monitor setup that was completely at odds with the room's sparse, humble decor. On the wall behind her hung a single framed photograph, a smiling man in a crisp army uniform, his chest adorned with a constellation of ribbons. Beside the photo, mounted in a deep shadow box, was a single heavy medal hanging from a blue ribbon dotted with white stars. The Medal of Honor. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, a blur of motion. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, emerald green against a black void. She wasn't just a waitress. She was former Captain Clara Reed, U.S. Army Cyber Command, a specialist in digital warfare and cryptographic forensics. She had dismantled the financial networks of entire terrorist cells. Rocco Costello's criminal enterprise, by comparison, was a child's piggy bank. She had come here to disappear, to grieve her husband, David, in peace, to live a life so small and quiet no one would ever look twice. But Rocco had looked, and now he had her full attention. The money she siphoned was a test, a warm-up. She rerouted the fractions of cents from his money laundering operations, a digital death by 1,000 cuts. It was nothing to him financially, but it was everything to her. It was practice. It was a promise. She navigated his firewalls with contemptuous ease, slipping past his digital sentries like a whisper. On one of the screens, a file named Docs Payload 3 was locked behind a formidable layer of encryption. For fun, she cracked it. It took her 93 seconds. Inside were shipping manifests, offshore account numbers, and a list of names. She saved a copy to a secure, layered server of her own, then erased her tracks, leaving behind nothing but the faintest digital echo. She leaned back, her eyes drifting to the photograph of David. "He thinks it's about money," she whispered to the smiling image. "He has no idea." Rocco's obsession with Clara grew. It wasn't love or even lust. It was the desire to own, to conquer the one thing in his restaurant that didn't bend to his will. He learned her name. He learned where she lived. And one evening, he appeared at her door, flanked by his 2 goons. "We need to talk," he said, pushing his way inside before she could object. His eyes swept over her small, clean apartment, a look of disdain on his face. "This is a shithole, not fit for a woman like you." He saw the wall with the photograph and the medal. He walked over to it, his curiosity piqued. "Who's the soldier boy?" he asked, his voice laced with mockery. "My husband," Clara said, her voice dropping a degree. Rocco reached out and unhooked the shadow box, his thick fingers fumbling with the clasp. He took out the medal, weighing it in his palm. "What's this shiny piece of tin?" "Put it down," Clara said. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a collapsing mountain. The air in the room became thin, electric. Rocco smirked, enjoying the shift. He rubbed his thumb over the engraved name. Captain David Reed. "For valor," he read aloud, then chuckled. "Brave man, huh? Got himself killed playing hero in some sandbox halfway around the world. Died for nothing. And left his pretty wife all alone to sling hash for guys like me." Every word was a calculated strike, designed to wound. He saw the flicker of pain in her eyes and pressed his advantage. "But don't you worry," he said, his voice turning syrupy and false. "Rocco's here to take care of you. I've decided you're going to be my wife." Clara stared at him, her expression unreadable. "You're insane." "I'm rich," he corrected her. "Which is better. You'll have everything you want. All you have to do is say yes." He saw the defiance hardening in her face. "Or," he continued, his tone turning to gravel, "accidents can happen. This building, it's old. Faulty wiring. A fire could start so easily. It would be a shame to lose all these precious memories." He dangled the medal from his fingers. The ultimate threat. He had finally found her breaking point. He had taken the most sacred thing in her life, the symbol of her husband's sacrifice, and used it as a weapon against her. This was no longer a game. This was war. He placed the medal back on the hook, leaving a greasy thumbprint on the glass of the shadow box. "I'll be in touch to discuss the wedding plans," he said, smiling. "Wear something nice." As he walked out, leaving the stench of his cologne and his threats hanging in the air, Clara's grief and pain began to cool, hardening into something new. Something cold, sharp, and utterly ruthless. Rocco Costello thought he was getting a wife. What he was going to get was a reckoning. The poker game was legendary in the underworld, a quarterly event hosted by Rocco at his most exclusive private club, the Cypress Room. It was a neutral ground where deals were made, territories were carved up, and millions of dollars in untraceable cash changed hands over felt tables. His guest of honor this time was Niccolo Moretti, the head of a rival family from the West Coast. The deal on the table was a partnership in a new shipping route, worth a fortune. For Rocco, it was as much about power as it was about profit. He needed to show Moretti and everyone else that he was still the king. Clara knew this was her first real chance to draw blood. For 2 days, she lived on black coffee and adrenaline, her apartment a cocoon of glowing screens. She wasn't just hacking a system, she was conducting an orchestra. First, she breached the club's network, a surprisingly simple task. Men like Rocco spent millions on physical security, armored doors and armed guards, but considered cybersecurity an afterthought. She slipped into their system like a phantom. She didn't just want to watch, she wanted to control. The game used a state-of-the-art digital card shuffler built into the table, designed to prevent cheating. To a master cryptographer, it was a toy. Clara reverse-engineered its randomization algorithm in under an hour. Now, she could deal any hand she wanted to any player at the table. Next, she set up an anonymous, encrypted tip line. She fed a single, tantalizing piece of information to Sergeant Frank Miller, the head of a small, notoriously incorruptible organized crime unit at the city police department. Miller was a bulldog, hated by the brass for his refusal to play ball. He'd been trying to get a foothold in Rocco's empire for years. The tip was simple: the time, the place, and the assurance that over $5 million in cash would be on the poker table. It was bait he couldn't resist. The night of the game, Clara watched through the club's own security cameras, a ghost in the machine. She sat at her terminal, a cup of tea growing cold beside her as the titans of the criminal world took their seats. Rocco was in his element, loud, arrogant, and dripping with confidence. For hours she let the game play out naturally, only subtly nudging the odds. Then, as the final, massive pot grew, she made her move. She dealt Rocco a monster hand, 4 aces, a hand so strong it was almost a statistical impossibility. She could see the greed and triumph light up his face as he looked at his cards. He pushed his entire stack of chips into the middle of the table. All in, he boomed, his voice echoing in the silent, smoke-filled room. Moretti, his opponent, hesitated. Clara had given him a strong hand, too, a king-high flush, good enough to be tempting, but not good enough to win. She watched Moretti's face, his eyes narrowed in calculation. He was about to fold. Clara initiated phase 2, a text message, spoofed to look like it came from Moretti's own right-hand man, flashed on his phone. It read, "He's bluffing. I saw his eyes. He has nothing." It was the perfect psychological nudge. Moretti's pride, stung by Rocco's arrogance all night, took over. He shoved his own massive stack of chips forward. "I call." Rocco's grin was a shark's. He slammed his 4 aces onto the table. "Read 'em and weep, Nicky. The king is still the king." His men cheered. Moretti's face went pale, but just before the dealer could push the mountain of cash toward Rocco, Moretti slowly turned over his own cards. Clara had made one final, microscopic alteration to the shuffler's code just seconds before the deal. A king-high flush was on the table, just as she had planned. But it wasn't a king-high flush of clubs or spades. It was a royal flush, the one hand in poker that could beat 4 of a kind. A collective gasp went through the room. Rocco stared at the cards, his face contorting from triumph to utter disbelief, then to pure, volcanic rage. He had been played, humiliated in front of his entire world. "Cheat!" he roared, lunging across the table. Before he could reach Moretti, the doors to the Cypress room burst open. "Police! Nobody move!" Sergeant Miller and his team swarmed in, weapons drawn. Panic erupted, but Miller wasn't interested in the players. He was interested in the pot. "Illegal gambling," he announced calmly. "All cash on the table is seized as evidence and subject to asset forfeiture." His men swept the millions of dollars into evidence bags. Rocco could only watch, his face a mask of apoplectic fury. He had lost the deal, lost the money, and most importantly, lost face. He had been made to look like a fool. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was no accident. Someone had targeted him. Someone had declared war, and as his eyes scanned the faces of his rivals and his own men, he never once thought to look in the direction of the quiet waitress who was currently watching it all unfold on a screen miles away, a small, cold smile of satisfaction on her face. The poker game fiasco had turned Rocco into a wounded animal, more paranoid, more vicious. He knew he had a traitor in his organization, and he began tearing it apart from the inside out, his rage a blunt instrument. This chaos was the perfect cover for Clara. The hunt for the final blow had begun. Rocco's empire was built on a single, legendary piece of digital architecture, a black ledger known only as the Chimera. It was said to contain every dirty deal, every bribe, every murder contract, all shielded by encryption so advanced that governments had allegedly tried and failed to crack it. It was Rocco's real source of power. Destroying the Chimera wouldn't just cripple him, it would annihilate him. Clara transformed her apartment into a war room. Maps of Rocco's businesses, personnel charts, and network diagrams covered the walls. She slept in 90-minute cycles, her focus absolute. This was an intelligence operation, and she was deep in enemy territory. Her first target was a low-level enforcer named Sal. She tracked his online habits, a weakness for online poker and expensive sneakers. Posing as a customer service representative for a sneaker website, she sent him a phishing email with a link to a special discount. Sal, greedy and careless, clicked it. In that instant, a keylogger installed itself on his phone. Within hours, Clara had his login credentials for the Costello network's outer perimeter. She was in. But the outer shell was just the beginning. The Chimera was housed on a private, air-gapped server in the sub-basement of Rocco's headquarters, a downtown skyscraper. To get to it, she needed physical access. She zeroed in on Arthur, the nervous accountant. She knew from her surveillance of the restaurant that he ate lunch at the same small deli every Tuesday. That week, Clara was there, dressed as a bike messenger. As Arthur walked past, she accidentally stumbled, dousing his suit jacket with a large, steaming cup of coffee. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she cried, dabbing at his jacket with a wad of napkins. In the flurry of apologies and frantic blotting, her fingers, nimble and sure, brushed against the security pass clipped to his belt. A tiny, paper-thin RFID cloner, disguised as a button on her glove, did its work in less than a second. It's fine," Arthur stammered, more flustered than angry. He hurried away, never noticing the digital ghost who had just stolen the keys to his kingdom. That night, dressed in the dark, nondescript uniform of a cleaning service, Clara swiped the cloned card. The light flashed green. She was inside the lion's den. She moved through the silent, empty office building with the quiet confidence of a soldier. She avoided the main elevators, taking the service stairs down to the sub-basement. The server room was protected by a final, formidable obstacle, a heavy steel door with a biometric voice recognition lock. This was the part she couldn't brute force. She had to know the passphrase. For weeks, she had been using the bugs she'd planted to listen to Rocco. She'd compiled hours of his tirades, his phone calls, his quiet muttering. Using sophisticated linguistic software, she analyzed his speech patterns, his cadence, his emotional tells. The passphrase wouldn't be his mother's name or his birthday. Rocco's ego was a monument to himself. The phrase would be something deeply personal, something that fed his own dark legend. She ran a search algorithm through her collected audio, looking for repeated, emotionally charged phrases spoken only when he thought he was alone. It took 3 days, but finally, she found it. A name, whispered late at night in his office, thick with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. Danny Boy O'Malley. A quick cross-reference of old case files gave her the story. Danny O'Malley was a rival dock worker, Rocco's first kill when he was just a 17-year-old punk trying to make a name for himself. It was the murder that started his rise to power. It was his genesis. That was the key. Clara stood before the lock. Using a voice modulator programmed with the audio fragments she'd collected, she synthesized Rocco's voice. She took a deep breath. "Danny Boy O'Malley." She spoke into the receiver, her modulated voice a perfect, gravelly replica of Rocco's. There was a click, and the heavy lock disengaged. The steel door hissed open. Inside, the server racks hummed, their blue and green lights blinking in the cold, sterile air. In the center was a single black server with no markings, the Chimera. Clara plugged in a portable drive. The download began. Terabytes of data, a detailed chronicle of 2 decades of corruption and violence, flowed into her possession. She had it. She had the weapon that would burn Rocco Costello's world to the ground. As the progress bar crept toward 100%, she heard the distant clang of the stairwell door on the floor above. Security. Someone was coming. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her training took over. She snatched the drive, closed the server room door, and melted into the shadows of the basement, a ghost once more, leaving the heart of the beast still beating, for now. The annual Beacon of Hope charity gala was the crown jewel of Rocco's public relations campaign. It was where the city's elite, politicians, judges, and business leaders came to kiss his ring and pretend his money was clean. This year, it was more important than ever. He needed to project strength, to erase the humiliation of the poker game, and he had the perfect prop to display his power, his new fiancée. Clara stood beside him near the ballroom entrance, a prisoner in a glittering emerald gown that felt more like a cage. Her face was a placid mask, but her mind was a whirlwind of final checks and calculations. Rocco's hand was a possessive brand on the small of her back, his thumb rubbing small, arrogant circles into the silk. He leaned in, his voice a proprietary murmur meant only for her. "Smile, my love," he whispered, his breath hot and foul with expensive whiskey. "Tonight you see what real power is. See Judge Callahan over there? He owes me his entire career. Police Chief Reynolds? He's more my employee than the city's. These people, they run the city. The mayor, the councilman. They all eat from my hand. And tonight, they'll watch you eat from it, too." He was utterly convinced he had won, that her quiet compliance was the white flag of her broken spirit. He mistook her silence for submission, her stillness for fear. He was a fool. The ballroom was a masterpiece of opulence, with towering floral arrangements and shimmering chandeliers that dripped crystal light. A massive screen hung behind the stage, currently displaying the gala's benign logo. In her small, beaded evening bag, Clara clutched a modified smartphone. It was the detonator. Across the room, she saw Arthur, the accountant, looking paler and more anxious than ever. He clutched a glass of champagne with a trembling hand, avoiding eye contact. Rocco followed her gaze and sneered. "Look at that pathetic little mouse. Spilled coffee on his suit the other day. I nearly broke his jaw for the disrespect. I should fire him just for being a clumsy oaf." Clara's expression didn't change, but she and Arthur shared a fleeting, almost imperceptible nod. The coffee had been no accident. It had been a meeting. Arthur, a man Rocco had bullied and belittled for a decade, had become her hidden ally, her inside man. He was terrified, but his hatred for Rocco, a slow-burning ember fanned by 1,000 daily humiliations, was finally stronger than his fear. As the evening wore on, the city's mayor took the stage, his face flushed with wine. And now, a man whose generosity knows no bounds, a true pillar of our community, Mr. Rocco Costello. Rocco squeezed Clara's hand with bruising force, a final assertion of ownership. "Watch and learn, sweetheart. This is how you own a city." He strode toward the stage amidst a wave of polite, hollow applause. He basked in it, his ego swelling to fill the cavernous room. He tapped the microphone, his smug, predatory grin projected 20 feet high on the screen behind him. "Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "They say a man is measured by what he gives back to his city. And I have always tried to give back to the people who keep us safe, our brave and incorruptible police force." As he spoke, Clara raised her phone. Her hand was perfectly steady. Her thumb hovered over a single, crimson icon on the screen, labeled Execute. She took one last look at his arrogant face, a monument to cruelty and corruption, and then she pressed down. Behind Rocco, the gala's logo flickered, distorted, and vanished. It was replaced by a stark, black screen with ominous white text. A heading appeared in block letters. "The Chimera Ledger, R. Costello, final audit. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Rocco, lost in the sound of his own voice, didn't notice. On the screen, a new section appeared. Bribes and payoffs, City PD. A list of names began to scroll down, accompanied by dates, offshore account numbers, and dollar amounts. At the top of the list was Police Chief Reynolds, who was sitting in the front row. The wine glass slipped from his trembling fingers and shattered on the polished floor. His face, moments before ruddy and cheerful, was now the color of ash. Rocco droned on, oblivious. And to ensure our city is led by men of integrity, true public servants, like our esteemed mayor. The screen changed again. Political corruption, mayor's office. It wasn't just text. A grainy surveillance photo appeared, showing the mayor accepting a briefcase in a parking garage. An audio file played, the mayor's own voice, tinny and terrified, filling the silent room. "I can't make that evidence disappear, Rocco. It's impossible." Rocco's recorded voice replied, cold and deadly. "Everything is possible when you work for me." The mayor, who had been raising a forkful of salmon to his mouth, froze, his jaw slack. The fork clattered onto his plate. The crowd's murmuring grew into a wave of shocked gasps. People were standing up, pointing at the screen, their faces a mixture of horror and fascination. Rocco finally sensed the shift. The applause had died. He faltered, his words trailing off. What the hell is going on?" He turned, and he saw it. A payment to a dock workers' union official was displayed next to a high-resolution photo of a rival's warehouse burning to the ground. A wire transfer to a shell corporation was linked to the name of a federal witness who had disappeared, now stamped with a single, chilling word: terminated. It was a complete, irrefutable, and beautifully organized tapestry of his crimes. His head whipped around, his wild eyes scanning the crowd until they found her. Clara stood perfectly still, her phone held aloft like a torch. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she let him see everything in her eyes. Not a waitress, not a victim, but the soldier who had methodically, patiently, and utterly destroyed him. A primal roar of pure animal rage erupted from his chest. "You!" He lunged off the stage, shoving aside tables, his face a mask of murderous intent. He was no longer a charming philanthropist. He was the gutter snake, cornered and ready to kill. He got within arm's length of her, his hand reaching for her throat. "You little roach! I'll kill you with my bare hands." Clara didn't flinch. Her voice was ice. "You shouldn't have touched the medal, Rocco." Before he could reach her, two figures stepped into his path. Sergeant Frank Miller and a team of FBI agents, who had been waiting in the wings dressed as hotel staff, moved in. "Rocco Costello," Miller said, his voice ringing with satisfaction. "You're under arrest for, well, take your pick." Rocco fought, thrashing like a wild animal, but they were too many. They slammed him to the floor amidst the shattered champagne glasses. As they hauled him to his feet, cuffing his hands, he was still screaming, his eyes locked on Clara. "My server! It was air-gapped! Impossible! No one could get in! It's a fortress!" A quiet voice cut through the chaos. "It was." Arthur, the accountant, stepped forward from the shadows by the wall. The nervous tremor was gone from his hands, replaced by a profound calm. "Until I plugged it into the network for a system diagnostic last night. I ran the Ethernet cable myself. You said my numbers were always off. I just wanted to perform a full audit." Rocco's head snapped toward Arthur, his face contorting with a new, deeper level of betrayal. You little worm! I made you! I could have crushed you like a bug." Arthur met his boss's gaze without flinching. "You did crush me, Mr. Costello. Every day, for 10 years. You just never noticed." The fall of the Costello Empire was swift and total. The Chimera Ledger, broadcast live and captured by every news outlet, was a key that unlocked hundreds of crimes. The gala, intended to be Rocco's crowning achievement, became known as the Night of the Great Unmasking, a citywide purge that brought down dozens of its most powerful figures. Rocco's trial was a formality. Stripped of his power, he was just a man, aged and shrunken, his famous bravado replaced by a sullen hatred. The prosecution's star witness was Clara. She took the stand not in a uniform or a gown, but in a simple pantsuit. She presented the digital evidence with the cool, clinical precision of a surgeon, explaining the cryptographic keys and the architecture of his criminal network. She never once looked at him. She spoke only to the jury, her voice clear and steady, the voice of pure, irrefutable fact. He was sentenced to life without parole. Months later, Rocco was being moved through the sterile, green-lit corridors of the Supermax facility that would be his tomb. His tailored suit was gone, replaced by a cheap orange jumpsuit. As they pushed him forward toward the final processing gate, he saw her, Clara, standing at the end of the hall, just beyond the steel bars. She had been granted a final 5-minute visit. "You," he rasped, straining against the guards. "The waitress. How did you... Why? Why me? What did I ever do to you to deserve this?" She stepped closer, her voice soft enough that only he could hear it. "You don't even remember, do you? You're searching your memory for some grand betrayal, some rival I was working for. You can't find it, because it was never there." "Then why?" he begged, his voice cracking. "My life is over. Why?" "The restaurant," she said simply. "Our first and last conversation. You sent back the wine, so I poisoned your network. You said the steak was tough, so I carved up your empire piece by piece. You complained the music was too loud, so I made sure the sound of your world crashing down was deafening." A flicker of memory crossed his face, a vague recollection of a small, forgotten cruelty. "The tip jar," he whispered, the words tasting like ash. "You did all this for pocket change?" "No," Clara said, her voice quiet and final as a closing door. "You did all this to yourself for pocket change. That night, you spilled what was mine, so I decided to take back what was yours. Every dirty dollar, every corrupt official, every secret. You scattered my earnings for the night across a dirty floor, so I scattered your life's work across a 20-foot screen for the entire world to see. You ground a $5 bill under your shoe, so I ground your billion-dollar empire into dust, and you threatened the one thing in my life that is sacred. You touched my husband's medal. You defiled his honor to prove a point. So I took the only thing you ever honored, your power." She paused, letting the full weight of it settle on him. "It was a perfect mirror, Rocco. Proportional. You told me to pick it up. You told me to get it all." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "So I did." The guards pushed him forward. The gate slammed shut between them, the final deafening clang of his world coming to an end. He wasn't destroyed by a rival or the FBI or some grand conspiracy. He was annihilated by a waitress because of a single act of petty malice, so insignificant he could barely remember it. He was left staring through the bars at the woman who had been a ghost in his machine, and was now the ghost of his entire life, the architect of his perfect deserved ruin. Clara turned away from the prison, the cold weight of the steel gate at her back. She reached up and touched the cool, familiar metal of the medal she now wore on a simple chain beneath her shirt. She had taken it out of the shadow box. It didn't belong behind glass anymore. It belonged with her, a silent reminder of what was worth fighting for. She thought of David, of his easy smile, and the unwavering strength in his eyes. She had done this for him, for the honor he had died for, the honor Rocco had so casually defiled. But she had also done it for herself. She had found a purpose in the ruins of her grief, a way to fight back against the darkness. Turning her face toward the afternoon sun, she walked down the street, melting into the anonymous crowd. She was just a woman in a simple coat, another face among millions. No one would ever know she was the one who had single-handedly toppled an empire. And that was just the way she wanted it. The buzzing was gone. The war was over. She was free,